hats. But in case there's anybody who's watching on the stream and doesn't know, Dave is not, strictly speaking, safe for work. So listen, you were warned. That's part of the deal. But he is one of the most brilliant startup writers of our time, the master of the R for startup metrics for pirates and many other things. And he's going to moderate our panel on the role of design in a lean startup. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, the other most brilliant writer today. So we're going to talk about a subject that actually isn't usually very easily measurable, called design. I'm going to take 2 or 3 minutes to talk about some ideas that I have and then let the panel contradict me completely on what they think design is all about. If you have burning questions during the middle of the presentation, we won't respond to them unless you really jump up on stage, so please hold those amazing questions for the end or tweet. I'm going to camp on the lean design hashtag in addition to the SLLconf hashtag, so particularly comments or questions about this talk, lean design. And for people who want to follow along at home, I've created a few bit.ly links, bit.ly/capital L, capital D, lean design 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's capital L lean, capital D design 1 through 7. All right, so I'm going to present a few ideas. I wrote an article called Design for Startups that Business Week cleaned up for public consumption. That was published about a month or two ago. In that article, I made the assertion that actually for at least internet design and consumer internet startups, that design is probably more important for startups than engineering design and marketing are probably more important for startups to consider. So it's actually relevant that we figure out like what is good design and how do we measure that. And in my opinion, good design is really not explicitly visual design. It's really about storytelling. And so the actual measurable goal that I think you should be optimizing for, there's two things. One is user happiness. The other is business value. So your goal as startup entrepreneurs, designers, founders, whatever, is to make the user respond emotionally to something that you're doing and then deliver on the promise of that call to action or response in a way that actually makes your business money or gets you enough users that somebody else buys you for money, I guess might be the other way to think about that. So really what I'm presenting is the case that design is about storytelling. And that storytelling can certainly be presented visually. It can also be presented via text. It can be presented via audio or sound. It can be through the creation of features that people experience. But really, all of this, the test is the response in the user's brain and their actions that they take. So it is actually measurable to say, I have good design, based on a hypothesis for what do you want the user to do and their actual actions that they take. And on the internet, that's somewhat easy to measure. So now I'll get to the not safe for work part. Let me see here. If I can move the slide forward, let's do this. Yeah. Pictured at the left is Kathy Sierra, one of my favorite bloggers. She writes a blog called Creating Passionate Users, actually has done a bunch of stuff in the past more than recently. And she created a slide about love and hate and the, quote, zone of mediocrity, which is in the middle, and how users feel about your product and service. It's actually better to have either an extreme reaction on either the hate or the love side, not so much in the middle. And I sort of, again, as is my usual scenario, took that to the not safe for work extreme, which is to make something that users care about enough to fuck or kill. You may have reactions to my statement that are also along those lines as well. And what I really mean by this is the opportunity to discover meaning, right? What I mean by meaning. I mean something that the users care about and react to. And I would say the absolute magnitude of their reaction is really what you're optimizing for. So you don't want a lot of people to say, that's okay. You want a small number of people to either love it or hate it. And both of those are good signal to then build and try and discover more information about. Yeah, let me show you one more thing, and then I'll jump into a slide by Andrew. So a lot of what I think you can figure out about design is actually testable by many things which aren't code. And primarily, I think a lot of those are visual imagery and copy words. And the combination of those two things, and you can test that via landing pages, you can test that via a lot of things, subject lines in Twitter, in email, in just visually presenting images to people and testing their reaction. So a lot of the things about how users react to meaning doesn't require code. That's great. Why is that great? Because you don't actually have to hire a lot of people to write code, who are usually expensive, and you don't actually have to spend a lot of time building features. You can just draw stuff and show it to people quickly and get their reaction. A lot about what I think lean design is not writing code, but about discovering an emotional reaction and testable response in users, and then trying to drive towards more meaningful ways to convert that into their happiness or your business value. So now I'm going to switch. So if you go to bit.ly/leandesign2, here's one of Andrew's slides. It's just associated with a post that he wrote about minimum desirable product. Wait, X6, I think I have the wrong one there. Hold on. So I think he really captured a lot of this great when he talked about understanding user goals, creating this minimum desirable product, which is about what they love, right? And then iterate to get to a great product experience. However, the important point that I think he mentioned is it needs to be viable and feasible, and I think by viable he means viable from a business cost standpoint, feasible meaning that you can actually build it. And I will show one more piece that he talked about, which is here. So he says to test the riskiest thing first, and that might be the business feasibility of the cost-revenue equation of your users. It might be the feasibility technically of building the product that you're talking about, or it might be this user desirability feature. On the internet, I think, actually, one thing that's kind of interesting lately is you can build quite a number of things that don't require a hell of a lot of technology complexity. So presenting an emotional case to the user and their response to it usually isn't always based on a high amount of complex intellectual property. In some cases, that may be true. It definitely is probably based on whether it costs you more or less to acquire those users than you can generate value from them. So that probably is a test that you have to worry about. So at this point, I'm going to let all the panelists respond to my assertions. And I will ask them each to introduce themselves with a response to the question, what is design, in your opinion? This is not a life story, so 3 minutes or less, please.
Well, that's such an easy question, Dave,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
I can squeeze down to 30 seconds.
And why is it important?
Yeah, so I think I've come to really, so some of the slides that Dave put up really came out of a lot of thinking, and actually Siki has presented some interesting stuff about this as well, which is sort of the role of metrics before you've hit product market fit and kind of what it's good for and what it's not so good for. And I think for me, how I've started thinking more and more about design versus especially kind of the metrics A/B testing approach that is very common these days is the level at which you're constructing the hypotheses about your business. And in a lot of cases, with design is if you're designing, you're designing for a person, you might be designing for a certain set of scenarios. These things are actually very hard to test quantitatively, and they sort of just require a lot of sort of a building of intuition, like intuitive model based on qualitative as well as some quantitative feedback, and the ability to sort of apply that model consistently across your entire product so you have a consistent user experience, I think of as kind of one of the most important roles of design. And then there's sort of what you do with optimization kind of above and beyond that. But I think that's personally how I'm seeing design as far as how it's fitting into lean startups.
Rashmi, I guess we had a conversation about sort of what's great design versus crappy design, what's sort of functional versus pretty. And you actually said a very revealing statement, which was some people look at SlideShare not necessarily as the prettiest site, but as a functional site. So can you give us a sense of what design means for you running SlideShare and how you've taken that to heart with the resources and people that you put on teams building the product?
Sure. So for me, design is the way that you express your vision. It's kind of the means. And the metrics are what you're measuring in order to figure out if you're headed towards your vision or not. So, and for SlideShare, right from the beginning, we are in very much a design-focused company on a very deep level. By that, I don't mean visual design. Our visual design can often be crappy. It's true, and especially when you're taking a metric.
eBay, Craigslist, other sites that come to mind.
It's not as bad as eBay.
Whoa. Oh, eBay's not a sponsor for this conference, are they, Eric? Not anymore, right, exactly.
Okay, I guess I'm not safe for work in some ways too. So, where was I? So we take design very seriously, but on a very deep level, which means that, what is it that we are offering our users? And what we offer our users is distribution of their ideas, for them to take their message or their content, upload it, and then we help them get it out in the community for people to connect with them. And to me, the SlideShare design does that very effectively. There's a lot of things wrong with it on many different levels, which we're always trying to clean up, and especially with the metrics-based optimization, which we have gotten more and more into in the past year. What we've realized is often these optimizations that you do, you're optimizing individual things, and the overall aesthetic experience really suffers. Then you have to kind of come back and to say, well, we're going to do this with an overall vision, and that's definitely a tension that I see.
So along those lines, I think that Andrew and I were talking about this too, is like, are you optimizing for a single call to action, for a single page, for entire workflow for a user? Are you optimizing for one user type versus another type of user? And then maybe even, do you have a static design, do you have a dynamic design that's resolving to a specific behavior that you can identify? So Siki, you're the founder of Serious Business and was recently acquired by Zynga, so obviously Mark Pincus thinks you're beautiful. So how do you think about design in sort of the world of Facebook, social games, and apps? And obviously you have a very iterative and metrics-driven process. What does good design mean in your world?
So we live in a different world in that we make games.
Please eat the mic.
Hello. We live in a different world in that we make games online. But I come from the web background, and my favorite definition of design is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs has a great quote. Most people think great design is about how things look, and great design is truly about how things work. But in the world of games, great design is about making a game fun. And Zynga and also Serious Business, before we were acquired, was known to be an extremely data-driven company. But you really can't get to create a fun experience iteratively through data. It is very much an art, and it's an instinctual process. And I saw that at work at
Okay,
Zynga.
if it's art, how do I measure whether it's good or not? I'm going to challenge you on that one.
Yeah, so we do measure it, right? But to get to the product in which you measure, you can't just start with random ideas and try to evolve your way towards it. We use metrics to confirm our hypotheses,
okay,
and not to get to the right answer.
So initial hypothesis is creative, and the test for that is analytic.
Right. And the thing about metrics is that it is great for testing. Metrics in general has two biases. One is you're biased to test for things that are easy to measure, and you're biased to test for things that are quick to measure. So if things are difficult to measure or they take a long time to see the effects of, things like retention, then the only practical way to get to the right answer is through design. Design thinking, game design, all of the qualitative things that make of a fun experience.
So that's actually a challenging statement, right? Because what you're saying is if I'm trying to measure like best case for retention maybe over a 3 to 6 month period, that's actually kind of hard to iterate over unless you're waiting for 3 to 6 month results.
That's right. The gold standard for that is to run an A/B split test, and over the course of 3 to 6 months, unless you're not planning on changing your product for 3 months, it's really, really hard to have a live A/B split test for anything longer than a week.
Right. And the bias is towards doing, call to action tests on a single page for a single set of users, and then making as many decisions as you can about that.
Things that are easy to measure and are quick to measure.
And does that result in sort of wrong data sometimes? I mean, how do you balance sort of the response to a single page versus an entire session versus maximizing money generated?
That is a PM art as well.
That's what?
That is a product management art. How do you balance
That is art, not science as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to what Siki's saying, just as David mentioned, there's sort of hypotheses at different levels, right? And you have hypotheses of, how maybe a particular page is going to perform versus a workflow versus, a single user versus whatever. Now, it turns out that of those options, one of those is very, very easy to measure, and the other ones are much harder, right? And so what tends to happen is if you sort of view, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and, so when in the world of, folks that are very, very good at quantitative testing, you tend to gravitate towards either individual pages or sort of little funnels, right, versus sort of the core experience, which like what Siki's saying, the core experience, you end up sort of managing that more from a qualitative standpoint, and that's sort of where design, really comes in.
Yeah, and I think sort of for the mathematicians here, I think the experience